Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Alternative Exit. Today we have a really great guest who's going to give us a very sort of different perspective on employee ownership than what we've experienced in the past. So Daniel Goldstein is a seasoned executive with extensive experience in employee ownership models and corporate governance. So he gained a lot of that when he was president and CEO of Foliance, a 100% employee-owned holding company based in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And from 2016 to 2023 in his role, he oversaw an expansion of that business, both in terms of sort of the business models, but also the different companies that they were acquiring and bringing into the employee ownership fold. So, which is going to provide a lot of great context. Since then, Daniel's been an active participant in discussions around employee ownership. He's authored several articles on ESOPs. He's an executive fellow at the Rutgers Institute of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing, and he's even testified at Congress around sort of ESOPs and employee ownership model. So with this intro, it's clear that Daniel's leadership and insights have been instrumental in promoting the benefits of employee ownership and providing that real-world perspective in connecting sort of both the academic to the real-world practicalities. So, Daniel, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And I just want to add to that introduction that it's all possible because of people that are far more knowledgeable and have been working for far longer than me in the community who have helped lead me and educate me on employee ownership. It's a wonderful collaborative community.
Yeah, I can totally echo that. Look, you've got a long head start on me, but following in your footsteps and a long way down the path. But I just wanted to start off. I mean, going back to your, I just wanted to see, like, your time at Foliance, was that your first introduction to employee ownership?
Yes, absolutely. Before that, I had worked for probably 20, 25 years in the world of family business, family office, family foundation. That's what the capital F is. The ultra high net worth, multi-generational, family-owned businesses, investments, philanthropy. And it's actually a great crossover because it's very long-term patient capital with a lot of similar attention to culture and sustainability and the long term. So it felt very comfortable to come to employee ownership. What's different about employee ownership is that employee ownership does not rely on DNA. And what I mean by that is in a family-owned business, you're basically relying on DNA, or you're going to change the structure, at least of the management, if not the ownership. I was just meeting with somebody earlier today, and they asked, what are the top 3 things about employee ownership? And I said, the first is that it's just great succession because, again, you remove the need to sell the company, to pass to heirs. You can put in professional succession transition systems. And so for me, that's really one of the top benefits of employee ownership. So yes, it was my first entree into that. And like I said, it's a really collaborative community. And so that's where I was fortunate to sort of dive into the deep end and just really get immersed quickly in it.
Yeah. And with that immersion, I mean, as I said, you've spent a career in sort of looking and evaluating businesses prior to that and sort of understanding, hey, great, is this investment opportunity? What are the levers that we're going to be able to have to drive growth? Look, it's a really long-established business, and sort of you came in and they were already 100% owned. When you were coming into that, what were any sort of fears that you had around this model?
It wasn't fears around the model. The fear that I had is that when I came into Foliance, they had just sold their main revenue producing business. And what was great was that really strengthened the balance sheet, but killed the income statement. And so my fear was that we were going to go out of business because we had to triage the loss of cash. And that's where we came up with the idea of creating a holding company structure and then going to deploy the remaining assets on the balance sheet to purchase profitable revenue and to construct this diversified portfolio. It wasn't actually a fear, it was the benefits and the advantages of using employee ownership as the structure vehicle, the motivation, the engagement to turn around something which otherwise had a pretty bleak future. It worked very well. Sort of, spoiler alert, going forward, it started with the partial ESOP in 1986. In 2020, hit the highest share value since the inception of the ESOP. It's gone up year on year. In 2022, won the National Employee-Owned Company of the Year with just wonderful recognition of the culture and the dedication of the employee owners. So absolutely it works. You want an honest answer. The fear is that my greatest fear of employee ownership, and I was very clear with the employee owners at Foliance when I was in the role of CEO and president, is that they don't value what they have. Because employee ownership by itself per se really doesn't do anything. It needs the buy-in, the education, the engagement of employee owners to be successful. So my greatest fear always with employee ownership is that the employee owners don't have the proper education, participation, buy-in, engagement to really emphasize the value of what they have.
Okay. Well, look, we're going to be able to dive into each of those a little bit later, but I just want to go back to that time when you decided to make a hold, to turn Foliance into a holdco and start to go out and then have those acquisition discussions with these companies. Well, what was it like speaking to the owners of these companies and telling them that, hey, look, we're going to be bringing into the fold to an employee-owned organization?
Yeah, and that's where there's the great benefit of the model of employee ownership. So you have all these companies, which right now with the silver tsunami, the aging out of the baby boomers, the world's greatest transition of ownership of company stock and assets, that a lot of transition needs to happen. So again, if it's family owned, you look to DNA. If it's closely held, then you're probably looking at a sale, probably to private equity or strategic buyer, with possible consequences of the business being moved out of the community. A lot of businesses are just going to be closed. An alternative is to set up an employee ownership structure, whether it's an ESOP, EOT, something else. But there's also, when you're setting up a standalone ESOP, for example, you really are setting up two businesses. One is the continuation of the underlying revenue generating business. The other is that you need to learn how to run an ESOP. And so what I found was that going out and talking to companies that needed to transition, that we added another advantage, which is that they didn't need to figure out the ESOP. By joining the platform which we had built, and there are many holding companies out there, ESOP holding companies, it eliminates a lot of the cost complexity and the risk of having to set up a new ESOP and learn how to run that.
Okay. So obviously reducing that complexity to be able to move into the model, what were they seeing as some of the other benefits of sort of coming into an ESOP holdco as opposed to exiting to private equity?
Now, not all private equity is going to be bad. However, they had seen what happened to a lot of their competitors that were bought by private equity and either consolidated, moved out of the community, eventually shut down. They didn't want that. The owners really valued their employees. They wanted the legacy of the business to continue. They wanted to make sure that the jobs stayed in the community. They wanted their company to be employee owned. And they did see that there was a challenge that would be presented to the managers that would take over for the owners as president and plant manager if they also had to take care of an ESOP. So they saw that as an added benefit, that not only would we be taking care of ESOP administration, compliance, legal, training, all that, but Foliance's model includes the shared services, which is a very high performing centralized function that allocates cost over the whole. And therefore, any one of the portfolio companies would not be able to afford the technology, the competencies, the people that they then have access to. But by being part of that ecosystem in which they share the cost, they get access to a support system, which really helps ensure their continued success. And there are synergies between the companies and the portfolio, which have proved to be very valuable in Foliance's case and with other holding companies.
Yeah, like I think that sort of talks to, I guess, what I've been hearing when speaking to business owners about sort of their transition to the employee ownership model. It's just a lot for them to get their head around. I mean, sort of how do I go finance that? How do I equip my team? What do I need to do to change my systems? And they just go, well, I'll just go look for alternative options. Like, so there is a lot there, and it seems like this approach of just bringing them in just sort of takes that decision off their plate.
It does, and I do not want to undermine or discredit the concept of setting up a standalone ESOP.
Mhm.
There are 6,300, 6,500 across the U.S. Clearly, it is a successful model. However, it's not just the process leading up to the transaction. It's then what do you do with it afterwards? Like you said, it's learning how to run the ESOP in the first year. What is the process of going through, whether it's financial review, audit, the valuation process? How do you make sure that you're compliant to all the 409A, 409P testing, the other things that you clearly would not know had you not had the experience of being in another ESOP. And so that's where, when you're acquired by an ESOP, whether it's to be folded into a standalone ESOP or to join a portfolio of an ESOP holding company, there is an advantage that there's a lot that you don't have to learn because that's going to be brought to you by the host, by the acquirer.
Okay. When you're bringing these employees on board, I mean, a common question I get is that, hey, the my employees don't want, they're not going to see the value of this asset. Like, why are we going to sort of give them ownership? I mean, how did you address that when you were bringing these companies involved?
So the first thing, something that I was taught by my employee owners when I was CEO, is that it's not given to them. It's not a handout. It's earned by them. Because I used to talk about it was free because you don't take the money out of the paycheck, and they said no, it's earned, and absolutely that's the case. But you bring up a really good point that, again, employee ownership by itself can actually create entitlement and other negatives unless there's good education, communication, messaging. And so part of it is you kind of have to give the user manual to somebody who has worked under a completely different set of rules and expectations all their life, has probably never been exposed to this. And all of a sudden they're being told, hey, you're an owner. Well, the first thing is, what's the difference between an owner and shared ownership? Because an ESOP is about shared value. There it tends to be greater transparency, inclusion, and decision making, but there's still the right people at the right places to run the business because it is a business. So, as an owner, you might have a personal guarantee and a bank loan. You're not going to have that as an employee owner. And as an owner, you might be able to unilaterally make decisions. As an employee owner, you're not going to be able to vote on what the management gets to decide. You have a greater voice in the matter. And so that's all part of the work in educating employee owners and educating your management so that they listen, respond. People want to be welcome, heard, respected, all of that. And it takes work because a lot of people have not had that formalized training on how to be a part of that system.
Yeah, I could imagine that there's like a little bit of like an organ rejection, like from some of these people when it comes like they've transplanted into this new organization and now but they're asked to provide their opinion on where they think the company could grow, and like then they're asked to like participate in like who's going to be representing them in certain councils. Like, yeah, like, so I'm sure that's going to create some tension for some folks.
And there are two issues around that. One is that it takes time. So ESOPs are not intended to be get rich quick. And so the first year, it's all theoretical until you get your first allocation. And when you get your first allocation of stock, it's usually not that big. And so it takes a little time to build up. Most ESOPs have vesting plans. Most are on a 6-year vesting plan to go from 0 to 100% vesting. That just means how much of the bucket of units that are being allocated you own. So that does take some time to learn. And then it's also, as you said, how do you engage as an employee owner? Well, some people think that immediately it means that you get to complain about everything. And it's like, well, no, it's not just if you see something, say something. If you see something, say something and participate in figuring out how to solve the issue or make it better. You may not have the answer, but at least be willing to work with your co-owners on how to solve for the problem or make an issue better.
Mm-hmm. How did you foster that within these companies? You talked about the first year being super important, that there's a lot that needs to happen to bring it to life. What are some of the actions that you saw being really successful when you were transitioning these companies?
So the first thing is that you have to work with the people at the top, because you need role models. If you don't have leaders who are modeling the behaviors that you want throughout the organization, then it's not going to work. And so the first thing that I did was I participated at a program at the University of Pennsylvania, which is uniquely designed for CEOs and presidents of ESOPs. Later, the president of the ambulance company, the president of the trailer company, my executive vice president, my successor were all asked to participate in this program.
Okay.
Because it really takes, we often say, like on the airlines, put on your mask before you help somebody else with their mask. So that's the first step. Then it's working on leadership development throughout the organization. We relied heavily on the Praxis Consulting Group to bring in curriculum development tailored to our program, and some really basic stuff, because a lot of times, especially like a manufacturing company, you're a really good welder, so you get promoted to be a lead, then a supervisor, then you're a manager. Well, just because you're a really good welder doesn't mean that you have really good communication, feedback skills, know how to give performance coaching, etc. And so worked on that. And then the thing that we did, reaching for my pocket here, is that we introduced a system that I wanted to reach out to every employee. And so I came up with this, which is the license to act. And our creative group in our media company developed this into this format. And it basically is just reminding every employee, your employee owner, what would an owner do? So it's not a list of words, phrases, mission, vision, statement, etc. It's just putting in your pocket that you have a license to act. That means that as an owner, you look at quality, safety, productivity, customer experience, helping out your fellow coworkers, co-owners. And it takes time for that to gel and take hold too.
Yeah, I love the card. It just sort of makes it such a tangible thing that people can keep in their pockets to potentially change behavior. It's fantastic.
But it takes work, because it takes having management listen to it, respond. It's really no different than any continuous improvement, suggestion box system, anything like that. It's listening, taking action, reporting back, involving people. And it takes time for people to build the trust to participate in that and see the results.
Totally. When you were describing a little bit more about like that transition of the welder, the great welder becoming the lead and not having the skills. I mean, that is, being able to sort of train and enable your top performers is just good business. I mean, what part of, I think, the success that you had was down to just you implementing these good business practices that sort of around sort of great leadership and engagement was down to that versus the actual ownership?
I've often responded when people say, what do you most need? And I'd respond, patience and consistency, because it does take time to build that trust. And, two little bad jokes. Had a lot of patience, just use it up quickly. So I needed to pace myself on the patience. And the thing about consistency is that it only works if you're consistent. But like you said, these are things that would work in any company and should be in any company. Now, there's a little bit more credibility when there are levers to pull, like the shared value and employee ownership. And so it's easier to implement in an employee-owned company, and it's also a little bit more necessary to do so. But I actually can draw back on something which has absolutely nothing to do with employee ownership. Earlier in my career, in my work, my philanthropic work, I worked with children with cancer and serious illnesses, and had the opportunity to work with Paul Newman before he passed away with his organization. And a lot of this challenge by choice is a therapeutic recreation model. It's about helping children who have been confronted with limitations face those limitations and grow. And you want to get them into the stretch zone, not into the panic zone. And what I found with these different ways of bringing this growth to the children with cancer and serious illness is that, again, that would be good for any child. And so a lot of that sort of earlier philosophy of how you grow the trust and affinity as in that situation actually helped inform what was doing, not that employees are children, but that the same systems that would work for employee ownership, they could work for any company. And there are some companies, again, coming out of some family-owned businesses. A lot of the family-owned businesses have instilled that similar style of culture of employees first.
Okay. But did you feel that the fact that there was that ownership perspective, like that it did have that an increased incentive for the workers?
Yes, absolutely. And like many other employee-owned businesses, we have at Foliance, I no longer speak for them. I'm retired from it, but at Foliance, there are employee owners that have been there for 40, 45 years. There are multiple generations in all their businesses, sons and daughters of mothers and fathers who are now working either alongside them or their parents have retired and they're now working there. It's very meaningful. And I always said that I don't know a single employee owner that comes in the morning, calls up on their computer their account balance, and says, "Okay, I'm motivated." So the financial is important, but that's not what's motivating people on a day-to-day basis. It's the work culture, it's the purpose, the relevance, the measure of how they fit into that, which is giving them a lot more than I think working for other forms of businesses that aren't focusing on these things.
Okay. Just want to pull on that thread that you said there. I mean, I loved how sort of you articulated that it's not just about the numbers, right? It's obviously that the whole package needs to come together for them to really sort of feel the value and for the company to really feel the impact of it as well. But you did sort of talk about there about it's not just seeing that number. I mean, and I know sort of Corey Rosen sort of talks a lot about sort of the need that it takes a few things. I mean, open book management is being one of those key parts, giving people access to the numbers. What else do you think is key to really sort of driving that successful engagement of employee-owned business?
Yeah, and so along the lines of the open book management, and there are various degrees. There are some companies that go to really full open book management. Um, I tended to be a little bit less towards that full end, and that would be a whole other discussion as to how you get into that, why you get into that. I know that Corey has been very successful in bringing business and financial literacy to organizations to help them understand that there's always, I believe, with successful employee-owned businesses, that greater transparency and inclusion. That's helping people understand how every day what they do impacts how the business is going to be succeeding. And you bring in that they're sharing in the value of that. So I think there's that, but it's also just getting people to feel better engagement. So I often talk about 80,000. And what is 80,000? Well, on average, and these are rounded numbers to make it easy, you work 2,000 hours in a year. You're probably going to work 40 years, maybe more, over your lifetime before you retire. So 40 times 2,000, that's 80,000. 80,000 hours, that's a long time. If you're not doing something which is bringing you some joy, some satisfaction, some reward, and not just financial, you're going to have a pretty miserable time. And so it's getting people to have something in that 80,000 hours that speaks to purpose, to engagement, to voice, to making a difference. And that's where I think employee ownership really gets people engaged if you can speak to that. And it's not going to be just about money. That money is not going to get you through the 80,000.
Yeah, no, definitely not. So part of sort of what I was picking up a little bit about you here, of what you were saying, like you're talking about sort of your sort of, I guess, on the spectrum of open book management, but like it's a spectrum that you need to be on to give these people this purpose. So it seems like there's probably that element that comes down of you've got to give them the information that they can act on. Which comes down to the level of governance as well. Like, what decisions can people make within their role, and how does that impact the business? How did you think about structuring that governance and ensuring that there were the right guidelines in place to that didn't stifle creativity and innovation from everyone in the business?
Again, starting at the highest level of the board, it was codifying a really. I was fortunate that I was able to bring together a new board, which was good because the prior board had been focused on a media business, and I needed a board that was willing to take the risks and support and challenge building a holding company. And codifying the board process, there were five main areas: strategy, process to meet that strategy, people, both internal and external, to fulfill that process, sustainability, and employee ownership. And those were sort of the five guiding principles to the board. Then putting together a leadership team worked towards expected behaviors and attributes. And they were pretty simple, but they were non-negotiable. Things like accountability, co-creation, that people had to be participative, that people showed up, and there was a safe, open table to put any issue on for discussion, and that once a decision was raised, that there's consensus for unified leadership, so that employees didn't feel that there's a confused mission. Um, those were really, I think, some of the ways to uh, build the direction. And again, those take time, but governance is absolutely just essential. The other thing about governance is that um, better to put it in when things are going well, because when things aren't going well, that's a difficult time to put in governance, and hopefully it keeps you from going off the rails when things aren't going well.
Mm-hmm. Like, governance is also one of those things that, for the everyday worker, can be a little bit boring. How did you bring some life to it so that people could understand sort of where they were? And, yeah, if you could share any of those sort of tactics that you found that were really helpful, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's that's where you get towards the inclusion and decision
Mm.
making. That governance is really the structure that holds decision making. And so, as you include more people in the decision making, they're being included in the governance, and I think that they get a better appreciation for it because they see the guardrails that both help them understand how they participate, but also help them understand how to hold others accountable. And so, I always said that, well, the employee owners aren't going to vote on, what I'm doing, that I work for them, not the other way around. And that I always told, certainly my direct reports, but also others, I want you to hold me accountable. Now, I'm also going to hold myself accountable, and I'm going to hold those around me accountable. But
Yeah.
When you start to have this mutuality in the ecosystem, the community that you're building, then I think that people really start to find governance not so boring. It's actually kind of interesting because it's the dynamic structure that's holding it all together.
Yeah, I love that. It's the part that I think that sort of underpins that is also the accountability piece. I speak to a lot of people about sort of governance. It's just, that's just whatever they do. They're going to make their decision, and it doesn't really matter what happens. The fact that people are now accountable for both sides throughout the ecosystem really changes the shape of what governance can mean.
And part of the leadership development that we did was uh, people often mistake accountability for punitive, as opposed to positive, building capacity and being some way to really build out more trust between people. And so looking at accountability, certainly there's going to be a corrective action if you're not following through and you're not holding yourself accountable. But if you turn it around, and again, part of the leadership development was appreciative inquiry, and that's looking more towards the positives and accentuating the positive. What worked? How do you repeat more of that than just focusing on the negative? Because when you just focus on the negative, usually it just generates a little bit more negativity.
Yeah.
So focus on the positive, and you're going to get more of that happening.
Okay. Did you mention that was appreciative inquiry?
Yes, appreciative inquiry. And it's just a philosophy of look for what works, accentuate that, see how to do more of that. Because doesn't that even just sound better to you, Andy, than looking at what doesn't work and let's think about how to,
Totally.
correct and punish people for that? What's working? Let's do more of that.
Yeah. Doing like a root cause analysis. That sounds horrible compared to an appreciative inquiry. The tone sounds very, very, very different.
It's even so positive language. It's important. So, for example, instead of doing a post-mortem, it's an after-action review. Instead of on safety looking at near misses, it's looking at good catches. It's not just a semantics game. When you focus people on the positive, they're more likely to feel drawn in to the process, as opposed to if you focus on the negative. And so, yeah, across the board, appreciative inquiry, after action reviews, good catches, get the positives out.
Yeah, I love that. Focus on the positive. So I've heard lots of different perspectives on how, I guess, the operating cadences for these companies changed when they moved to the employee ownership model. There's sort of how they were going to do their open book, how they were going to get the get those sort of innovation and suggestions. Like, what was going to be their digital their suggestion box? I mean, what did it look like for your companies? Like, how often like in terms of that cadence?
One thing, I'll start on once on the compliance side, but then I'll get to the more interesting and continuous improvement side. On the compliance side, I've heard from many people, and I've experienced myself. There does tend to be a little bit more regulation and rigor around employee ownership because, if you're family owned, it's basically yours. You can do whatever you want, but there is ERISA and DOL and IRS and other things with ESOPs, and what that means is that you tend to sort of professionalize a lot of systems. You want to make sure that you have auditable plans for how you give raises or merit increases, and that usually leads to better decision making. And better understood decision making, which can then be shared with others. So again, it's not just boring top-down command and control, but that added regulation actually helps professionalize systems, which can then be communicated and are better understood. On the continuous improvement side, patience and consistency. People tend to have a natural distrust that they're going to be listened to. And so I've heard that the simplest management device is a big board with a line down the middle. On one side, what you said, and on the other side, what we did. Real simple. Because if you don't have that second side, then people will stop even offering suggestions because they say management never does anything. We never hear back about it. Why bother? So it does take time. And even if things aren't implemented, why not? What did we do? Why did we not do it? What part of this was maybe a good idea or we can implement? Just making sure that you're really fully engaging people, not just on asking them for ideas and suggestions, but evaluating, analyzing, implementing, reviewing, revising, etc.
Yeah, so probably like you need very much focus on closing the loop. Once someone does ask something.
But I'm going to be obnoxious, Andy, and say that it's never a closed loop because you're just going to keep going around.
You get dizzy.
Yeah. It's a continuous loop.
Continuous improvement. But how often's too often to be asking for people's feedback? Like when do you think it gets in the way of their role?
Again, because you need to have follow through and feedback, if you're asking too often, then you don't give time to really analyze, implement, share. And so then people might just feel fatigue. And again, like you're not doing anything. I don't think there's a magic number. We did engagement pulse surveys twice a year. I know that some people do less or do none. There are some people that do flash surveys much more frequently. I think it's not so much the cadence; it's the follow through and the communication that makes a difference.
Okay. All right. So look, I do just want to. We've been focusing obviously a lot on sort of the operational experience and that time of transitioning companies. If we just take a little bit more of a broader lens, like what initiatives and projects are you currently excited about in the employee ownership space?
Well, lots of them. One of the biggest focuses in the employee ownership community is how do you grow employee ownership? And if you look globally, it's really interesting. Obviously in the U.S. there are ESOPs because of our tax regime, ERISA, et cetera. Outside the U.S., the prevalent form that is really growing quickly is the employee ownership trust. Um, there's a spectrum in employee ownership: co-ops, ESOPs, employee ownership trusts, sharing wealth with employees through other mechanisms like what KKR has pioneered in the private equity industry, employee stock purchase programs, all sorts of things. And the good thing about spectrums is that no one point is perfect for everything. And so that's why it's important to have a spectrum. It's also important to understand the differentiation between the different points on that spectrum. What protections, rewards, sustainability, longevity there are to these different systems. But what's exciting to me is that there's a lot of work happening at different points on that spectrum, which means that there's going to be more wealth being shared with employees, because that's not going to happen just by having ESOPs or just by having EOTs or some co-ops or some other form. So I think that that's one really interesting thing. The other one that's interesting, but it's a little, sort of in the weeds, wonky, nerdy, is this whole thing around sustainability. And sustainability studies, it's still surprising to me how many ESOPs haven't gone through this. It's a fairly costly process to go through if you're going to do it well. But it really, to me, is a little bit like if you don't go through a process to understand your long-term sustainability, it's like driving down the highway with your windshield blacked out. You still have your dials and other things, but you really don't have a great vision to where you're headed to. And in the past, some ESOPs have gotten in trouble because they didn't pay attention to the sustainability, or these models. They're relatively new, weren't really developed at the time. And so they got so successful that their repurchase obligations became unaffordable and they inevitably had to be sold and all that. But now there's just really good modeling around sustainability, which can help uh, management just plan out a better, more sustainable path for the ESOP, for growth, for managing targeted contribution levels, benefit levels to employees. That's pretty exciting. There's always great culture messaging. That's never ending. And the thing that's always really exciting is just how collaborative ESOPs are, and other employee ownership structures, how willing they are to share ideas with one another.
Yeah, it's an amazing and very generous community in that way, I've found. Hence why we're chatting here today. You're a part of that too, Daniel. So
Well, and Andy, you're a part of that. So there's another thing actually that I want to add, which is that ESOPs, employee ownership, used to really be pretty secretive. And I'll draw an analogy. So for many years, I managed a family office. And at that time, when I first started, nobody really heard of them. They knew what they were. And now you've got Netflix series, billionaires and Succession, and the Family Office. People actually know what they are now. I'm waiting for the first big Netflix series on employee ownership, where that would be like, okay, now we're mainstream. Now it's not just Andy and some other people out there, laying the world now. It's real mainstream. And honestly, I hope that someone comes up with a really great, binge watching worthy series on employee ownership.
yeah, that's right. I'll be watching when that happens as well. But yeah, I've really only sort of been in the space for about 2 years. I mean, we were trying to do it in my prior company, and we didn't quite get there. I mean, we struggled because there wasn't enough. We didn't know enough. We didn't know all these amazing resources are out there. But it's amazing to see the awareness that's been raised, like by sort of Pete Stavros doing the TED Talk, the 60 Minutes. It just, even though it's a very, very different flavor than, say, ESOPs, EOTs, it just does raise the awareness. And so, yeah, that part has been amazing. And it's good to see that the rising tide is lifting all boats, I think, when it comes to employee ownership. Well, we're just coming to the end, but I'd like to just ask you a fast round of questions where I just ask you 3 questions and you offer a quick response. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So
That's good.
who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
That's a toss-up. I'm just going to throw out two people that I've had great learnings from, Corey Rose and Joseph Blasi. I mean, they've just been around but there are so many more that I apologize to those that I haven't included.
No worries. So you've picked a very popular two at the moment. So what is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
Well, I'm going to follow on my first answer. The research that's presented by the NCO, the National Center for Employee Ownership, and the Rutgers Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. And the last one is, what would you say to a business owner who is sitting on the fence regarding a transition to an employee ownership model?
What do you want? What do you want for your employees? What do you want for your community? What do you want for your legacy? Why would you not want to do this? I am asked often, what is the downside? There is none. There's a downside to doing it with the wrong company, meaning not profitable, not the right demographics, etc. But good employee ownership, there is no downside. Why would you not want to do that? And I will help you work through those.
Very cool. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to sharing your knowledge and wisdom today. I mean, where can people, if they want to follow your journey and learn a little bit more about what you're putting out, where can people follow you?
I guess LinkedIn. I'm not tremendously active in that. I do serve on the board of the NCO. Come find me at an NCO conference. Just reach out to me. Like everyone who is no longer fully employed, I started an LLC. You can reach out to me at goesopllc@gmail.com. Happy to get on a call.
Okay. Well, Daniel, thank you again. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your leadership in the space, and really appreciate you for joining us on Alternative Exit.
Thank you, Andy. Really enjoyed it.
Great. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.